Dialogue, and we are recording. Um, we are just getting started. We're going to wait just a couple minutes to get a critical mass, and then we'll get going with our great program today. All right, again, this is the Southern California Water Dialogue. We're just waiting to populate the webinar. So just give us a couple minutes and then we'll get started. Got a great program today, and the sun is shining. One more minute. All right, everyone, we're going to get started. This is the Southern California Water Dialogue. We would continue on Zoom. We look forward to being in person one day again, but for now, thank you all for joining. Our program today is on the State Water Project, balancing value, risk, challenges, and opportunities. You see, we've got a great lineup, and we've got quite a few people still signing on. So the way the program goes, I, as co-chair, represent the Environmental Water Caucus and other organizations. We'll do the basic introductions. We will then have the presentations. My co-chair, Dee Zink from the Metropolitan Water District, will do the questions and answers. So hold on to your questions and we'll tell you how to do that as well. And then I'll do the final concluding remarks. Again, our names. And here's our steering committee. I want to thank everybody who's on it. And I especially always want to thank our coordinator, Kathy Caldwell, without whom we wouldn't have this program. So if you have any complaints, you can send them to me. If you have any compliments, you can send them to Kathy. And if you have new ideas, anything you'd like to see that we haven't covered, please let us know as well. So the webinar ground rules, and it is a webinar, so you won't see all the participants listed here, for instance. You're all familiar with this by now, but if you have any technical difficulties, and you can, please use the chat feature to let us know. Use the Q&A for questions, type in a question. We don't want them answered on that. We actually want to have a discussion, so wait until the end of the presentations. As you probably know, if you have a poor connection, move closer to your router or turn off anything else that's using up bandwidth, or even turn off your video if necessary. You all are muted by default, part of the webinar. And the presentations are roughly an hour, and the time that we have, and then the rest followed by our Q&A or dialogue. Again, ask a question at the bottom of your screen. Questions will actually be read by DZync. You can upvote yours or anyone else's question if you'd like to hear it sooner with a thumbs up. Okay, today our speakers are Jennifer Pierre, who's the General Manager of State Water Contractors, and Max Gomberg, Senior Policy Advisor for California Impact Network and a consultant. With that, Jennifer, if you can please start us off and give us a little background. We have people who are very involved in water, and others are here to learn and listen and ask questions. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you to you and the committee for having us today. I'm really looking forward to the dialogue. We can start in a PowerPoint that I've put together in part to kind of lay the land around what the State Water Project is, and then hopefully some perspectives that I'm happy to share. So moving to the next slide, who are the state water contractors? I think everybody is probably very familiar with Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, but there's actually 28 other public water agencies who contract with the State Department of Water Resources to participate and receive supplies from the State Water Project. These agencies are paying all of the water supply costs related to the State Water Project, but it's only one part of their portfolio. So similar to probably every water agency in the state, there are a number of different ways that agencies procure water for their service area, and none of the State Water Project contractors are wholly reliant on the State Water Project, but it is a very critical component of their portfolio. And I'll get into some of kind of what that looks like by region in a moment. Next slide. Just for kind of service area awareness, the light blue areas show where State Water Project water is delivered. It is up in the north near the Feather River watershed to the counties of Butte and Plumas, but we also deliver water into Napa and Solano counties, supporting ag and urban and wine growth there. We deliver into the East and South Bay Area, the San Francisco Bay Area region, and then into Southern California, as far north as San Luis Obispo County and Kern County, which is where most of the ag deliveries are, and throughout the urban Southern California region. The State Water Project serves water to 27 million people, and that is actually equivalent to 1 in 12 Americans. About 25% of the contracted State Water Project amount goes to ag, which is primarily in Kern and Kings counties, and that's about 25%. It's important to know when we talk about affordability and investment and how to continue to piece together water supply portfolios in the state in the face of climate change, that the ratepayers in the state have already invested over $30 billion in the State Water Project, and it's a very important asset for them. Next slide. I've highlighted Southern California region here, but these are regions that are served by the State Water Project, and just show the general water supply component of each of their portfolios, the square miles served, and the number of people served. In Southern California, you see that on average, the water supply from the State Water Project is about 30%, but I think that can wildly vary from 0 to 100% depending on the mix of water available in the region, and that's the same throughout the state. If you look across the state, though, it's pretty common that about 30% of the supply in any region portfolio is similar to Southern California's at about 30%. Next slide. This is a graphic that is taken from the Department of Water Resources Delivery Capability Report that they just put out last year. And 2024 was the first year, although they do these capability reports every 2 years. Last year was the first year that they actually looked at some very extreme climate scenarios. And this is really important for water agencies, especially those using the State Water Project, to understand how to plan for State Water Project supplies. And I found this very interesting because we've been reading so much and hearing so much about the aridification of the West and what does drought look like. And we know that there's wild swings in weather and precipitation and droughts. But what we're seeing here from DWR's modeling is they looked at what they called a 95th percent level of concern, all the way to a 50% level of concern, looking at kind of a range of climate change intensities, essentially. And what they found here on the right, if you look, is that even at the 95th percent level of concern, we're really only losing about 1.8% of the total precipitation in the Delta system. And then under the 75% level, it's about no change. And then at the 50% level, it's a little bit wetter. And what this is really saying is that we're not really changing the total precipitation that's coming into the system. What we're changing is the patterns. We're changing from more rain instead of snow. And we're also shrinking the period of time in which that precipitation appears in our system. So we're seeing a lot more rain on the valley floor or warmer storms that are occurring. And we're also seeing that happen instead of, let's say, December through April and May, we're now seeing that more concentrated January, February, March timeframe. So we have to figure out a way to basically adapt our operations and our infrastructure to be responsive to this hydrology, recognizing that we're not really seeing a change in when the total water available, but rather when it's and how it's available. Next slide. Getting specifically into the Southern California region, I wanted to show since the early 1970s through 2022, this is the deliveries from the State Water Project into the metropolitan service area. And you can see this is, of course, very variable given in large part hydrology and environmental regulation, but it changes every year. But 600,000 acre feet is about the number that is the annual demand in Southern California. And I've circled that to show that even in the more recent kind of in memory droughts of 14, 15, and 21 and 22, the State Water Project delivered that much water to Southern California. And so even though we have this extreme variability, again, regulations, lack of infrastructure, hydrology, there is a significant delivery even in dry conditions. Next slide. This is really important because the State Water Project is an integral piece of everybody's portfolio. It's not really replaceable. We can talk about alternative supplies, and all of our State Water Project contractors are making investments in other supplies. It's absolutely necessary in order to be climate adaptive, is to have multiple sources that have different distributions, different costs, different abilities to perform under different scenarios. But the volume of water provided by the State Water Project is truly irreplaceable. For context, in Southern California, I added here that we deliver 2.7 million acre feet on average. Can be higher, can be lower, depending on the allocation. But on average, that's 3 Diamond Valley Lakes full each year, or the equivalent of 48 size Carlsbad desal plants. It's very challenging to think about replacing that volume of water. However, it doesn't preclude other investments. And in fact, other investments and State Water Project work hand in hand. For example, storage projects can be filled by State Water Project, including in the ground, which is I'm a big proponent of, as you'll see shortly. Recycled water, you need something to recycle. A State Water Project is very clean water. It's an important part of the water quality management within Southern California as well. And it is integral to making the systems work. For most of our urban water agencies, it is still the most affordable water supply. And sometimes I equate that to kind of the, if you have an old car, it still is much more affordable to keep your car and maintain it than it is to build or buy a new car. So but knowing that, each of the State Water contractors renewed their State Water Project contract with the Department of Water Resources through 2085. Next slide. The next few slides kind of show the metropolitan water system and how the State Water Project fits with the Colorado River, another major source of supply for the Southern California region. Basically, there's an overlap here of where portions of the Met service area can receive both Colorado and State Water Project water, and that can be interchangeable depending on what supplies are available from each system. Next slide. In wet years, when the State Water Project's able to deliver, as for example, in 23 at 100% allocation, Metropolitan is able to decrease water coming in from the Colorado River and supply most of their service area through the State Water Project water. And then in dry years, next slide, the opposite occurs. And so these two systems work very hand in hand to ensure that the entirety of the Met service area always has reliable water. This is no different than other State Water Project contractors who have other sources through local streams, groundwater. Many have recycled water, their own storage facilities or reliance on State Water Project storage facilities. But this is how water agencies are piecing together their portfolios, integrating the State Water Project. Next slide. Here are kind of some of this is, official State Water contractor, and then on the right is, my idea. But really what we need to do is figure out how do we, in the face of climate change, when water agencies are having all sorts of pressure to diversify portfolios, to ensure that there's always a clean, reliable water supply, manage rates, because as we know, water rates have been rising everywhere across the nation, and also do this in a way that's environmentally protective. So we can look at kind of two sides of the equation. One is how do we address water supply reliability, and the other is how do we manage costs. On the supply reliability side, the State Water Project contractors have really been looking at climate responsive operational rules. Since the 2008-2009 biological opinions, we've been very focused on how to better manage the existing South Delta facilities. There are times when it is safe to pump water, and there are times when it is not. And understanding that and being responsive to the hydrology and fish presence is critical to ensuring that we're both protecting the environment and maximizing our water supply. On the long term, we have the Delta Conveyance Project, which I'll talk about in a moment, but that is a really critical project to be able to address the constraints of the South Delta and also address the hydrology I mentioned earlier, which is this very quick, flashy storms, shrunken wintertime with a lot of rain. We need to be able to move that, and we do have major subsidence in the canals throughout the Central Valley. This isn't specific to the State Water Project, but it is a phenomenon that has occurred in part by natural and in large part by overpumping and groundwater, and that's something that needs to be repaired throughout the valley. And then we're also looking at increased storage capacity. While not a State Water Project per se initiative, many state water contractors are participating in Sites Reservoir and other Prop 1 storage projects, looking at their own storage, and underground storage is absolutely critical in my mind. To the right, I have my dream, which is to build Sites Reservoir, Delta Conveyance, and significant groundwater recharge in the San Joaquin Valley. I think the combination of these three things really create a backbone water system for the state by having sites and Delta Conveyance ability to pick up water when it's available in the system and store it and or move it into groundwater storage so that it's available during drier conditions. In terms of managing costs, we have ratepayers on the State Water Project, as I mentioned earlier, pay all of the costs, but there are significant benefits to the state. All of the reservoirs provide significant recreational opportunities. Oroville Dam is the tallest dam in the United States, providing significant flood control. We have not received a flood control dollar since the dam was constructed in the early 60s. We also are very instrumental in keeping the lights on in the state. Our ability to modify water operations to address differences in demands and loads in any given day is critical to the balancing authority of the state. And none of this is really recognized within the cost structure. So this is a very important component of the work that we're doing right now to address affordability, ensure that that the water ratepayers are paying for their benefits. There's also a lot of opportunities for efficiencies in planning and permitting. There is absolutely no desire to cut corners on environmental review or environmental protection, but there are a lot of redundancies within the permitting structure, and there's ways to do more cost-effective planning. For example, design build type planning activities can save significant dollars, and we've got a very significant water system to continue to maintain. And there's just a lot of ways that you can address those costs that we're working on. Next slide. I want to talk about the next two slides, and those will be my last, are really about environmental stewardship of the State Water Project. So right now, we are significantly reducing exports to eliminate and minimize entrainment of fish in the South Delta. For example, the last several days, the Delta has been in significant excess flows. We're talking over 100,000 CFS or more, and combined, the South Delta pumps have pumped no more than 6,000 of that. So less than 6% of all of the water moving through the system is even being moved into Southern California right now. And that's because of the location of the facilities and the fact that there is a potential for fish entrainment risk. Each year, each of the projects, the State Water Project and the Central Valley Project, invest about $50 million in science and research in the Delta. And again, to really understand, when is it safe to move water? When is it not? What are those dynamics, and how do we improve how we manage the system? The State Water Project has also restored over 7,000 acres of tidal wetland habitats in the Delta. We've restored the YOLO notch, which increases floodplain access for fish, and it's spilling today. And then we've got ongoing science activities to inform hatchery management, including on the Feather River. Next slide, please, is related to the Delta Conveyance Project. I think everyone's generally familiar, and I'm happy to revisit during Q&A. But I did want to point out that the project has evolved significantly, and I think in response to what were fair environmental criticisms, especially related to construction impacts. I would say this project in the past has been much more of a concept, and with the Design and Construction Authority that was formed with the participating public water agencies and the Department of Water Resources, we've been able to really hone in on how to reduce those impacts in terms of the tunnel alignment, impacts to the primary highway through the Delta, number of acres that would be disturbed, how many forebays would be needed, boating impacts. All of these things have been looked at very carefully by the Design and Construction Authority and have been eliminated or significantly minimized. And there's more work that can continue to be done in this area. And I think with things like the completion of geotechnical studies, which hopefully they are able to now complete, they can continue to gather the information necessary to continue to reduce these impacts. On the operational side, major changes in the Delta Conveyance Project include no longer a proposal to reoperate upstream reservoirs. So really what we're doing is just when there is excess flow in the Delta, like there has been, for example, the last several weeks, that's when we would be able to complement the existing facilities with an ability to move water through the tunnel where there aren't fish congregating like they are in the South Delta. And this is after we've met all of the water quality requirements, all of the fish requirements, all of the senior water rights holders have been satisfied. Only then and only then do we consider this excess flow and available for our water right. In terms of outreach, and I think recognition of communities and those potentially impacted by the project, I think the Department of Water Resources has significantly improved how they've approached this with conducting more than 150 government-to-government tribal consultations, creating a community benefits program that is about $200 million or 1% of the projected cost of the project, and then significant job training and leave behinds for the community to really help bolster the economy of that area. So with that, I want to hand it over to Max, and I look forward to the questions and answers. Thanks for having us today.
Thank you, Jennifer. Hi, everyone. I'm Max Gomberg. I work as an independent consultant for the California Water Impact Network, where I'm a board member and senior policy advisor. I also work for other clients in the California water space, including the Shingle Springs Band of Miwok Indians. I also do federal work. Some of you may have known me in my prior career where I spent over 15 years working for the state, including over 10 years for the State Water Resources Control Board. What I'm going to do today is I'm not going to use slides. I'm going to talk broadly about the State Water Project and our broad societal goals, and sort of take us through an exercise about what could be possible. And the theme for my remarks today, you can think of it as why we can't have nice things. And the answer, which I'll give now and come back to, is basically some people have too much power and their interests don't generally align with the public good. So I want to start off with an exercise, which is just imagine the things you want from the State Water Project. Just take a minute to do that as I'm talking. Here's some of the things that you might want. Good quality water, a reliable supply. Probably you want it to be affordable. Just on a personal ability to pay level. For those of you who work in water systems or in the SoCal business industry, organizationally, you might want water for growth. If you're a water system, you probably like the idea of stable sales. Water systems generally aren't fans of lost revenues. We've certainly seen that during drought periods. And if you have some idealism in you, you might also want to make sure that there's water for the environment, that there's water for tribes and communities even outside of Southern California. So the second exercise is to imagine some of the things you're afraid of relating to the State Water Project. It could be you're afraid of running out of water. You could be afraid of mandatory rationing, loss of control over your agency or your ability to get the water you think you need when you need it. You might be worried about unaffordable cost increases. More broadly, you might be worried about Elon Musk staging a coup. That one's already happening, but I digress. Now, think about what you're being told by the governor and his deputies. And you heard Jennifer mention some of these. The risk of a system failure due to an earthquake or sea level rise. The risk of reduced supply due to regulations or operational constraints. The risk of reduced supply due to climate change. Right, that increased variability of wetter wets, drier dries, warmer temperatures, less snowpack. I want to talk about the unspoken assumptions behind these risks. So the first one is that the current level of supply from the State Water Project is necessary for the future. That is one of the key assumptions that underlies a lot of the projects that are being proposed, a lot of the both in front of the scenes and behind the scenes regulatory fighting that's going on right now, both at agencies and in the courts, and the public narrative. The idea being that, well, the only way to ensure a stable economy for the State Water Project contractors, and in particular for Southern California, is if the State Water Project continues to deliver what it has historically. And that is absolutely necessary. And again, underlying that assumption is this idea that there's no way to operate reliably with less water coming in from that project. And sit with that for a minute and think about that. And about whether what I'll term the unending growth mindset really needs to apply here regarding these supplies, because and you saw it in Jennifer's presentation. Here's some of the things that are being proposed to mitigate these risks or maintain the current level of supply reliability. We've got a $4+ billion reservoir that sites. We've got a $20+ billion Delta conveyance project. You've got hundreds of millions of dollars in habitat projects, and that doesn't even begin to address the increased costs due to electricity prices and the regulatory environment. That's all to maintain the current level of deliveries from this project. Let's talk about another unspoken assumption behind the risks, which is that there isn't enough local storage to provide essential supplies in the event of an earthquake. You may have heard various officials, state officials, talking about if there's a major earthquake in the Delta, it would take months for the necessary repairs to get the water flowing south again. And one of the, again, unspoken assumptions is, well, in that amount of time, there would be severe shortages of water due to the lack of supply. It's definitely one that I strongly suggest people really spend some time looking into. One of the things that Southern California Metropolitan in particular, and many other agencies have done over the last several decades is really boost the local storage in the region. And that's everything from Diamond Valley to other smaller supply storage projects. And one thing, and I'll talk about this a little more later, that is always interesting to me is the availability of all that stored water is used in both of the cake eating and having scenarios. And what I mean by that is the water agencies love to argue that, well, because we have the stored water, we should never be subject to conservation requirements because we've got enough storage. But when it comes to, well, what if the state water product got cut off for a few months? It's, oh no, we don't have enough storage. Which one is it? Let's talk about a third unspoken assumption relating to these risks. And that's that sea level rise would make the state water project water too saline, right? Too salty to just send down. That amount of sea level rise is inevitable, and the corollary that removing the salts would be cost prohibitive. And I want to note on this one that if you look at the analysis that's been done, it is definitely inconclusive. And if you're disinclined to believe me, I would recommend talking to Mark Gold, who's a member of the Metropolitan Board, whose prior job was as the chief Ocean Protection Council officer for the state, and looked into this and has spoken out about this at Met board meetings. Okay, so let's dive deeper. And let's ask the question, who needs more water and why? One of the arguments that often gets made is about growth, that Southern California, needs to build more housing to accommodate population, to accommodate business development. And that really then begs the question of, well, what are we building and what types of communities are we building? And where are we building them? There's been a history really since the post-World War II era of suburbanization and sprawl. We're finally getting beyond that in many places, and we're doing the urban infill that has multiple benefits, including reduced water consumption. because those housing units are a lot more efficient, have a lot less outdoor water use than your inland suburban housing development with the big yard. And so again, I think it really begs the question of how much water is actually needed for development. What are the urban water agencies projecting in terms of demand? How often have those projections proven true? The spoiler on that one, they always overproject demand, and demand has continued to trend down. So again, it calls into question, is the level of water that people are clamoring for really necessary, even when you factor in growth and new development? It also raises the question of whether the current levels of per capita water use are efficient. They're certainly more efficient than they were 15 years ago. We've gone through a couple drought cycles since then. We've at the state level driven home the conservation message, and people have responded. And per capita demand is lower than it was, but doesn't mean that there isn't room for additional conservation. Let's also look at the question of, what about the other water sources for Southern California? Are they in jeopardy? So the big one, of course, is the Colorado River. And the Colorado River is in trouble for a lot of historical reasons, mainly that the people who divvied it up did so in a way that overestimated the total flow from the river. And that is becoming even more stark now that we're seeing drying in the Southwest due to climate change. But it also raises the question, Metropolitan's share of the Colorado River is far from the largest share, and the largest share goes to the Imperial Irrigation District, which raises the question, are Met's interests actually aligned with the Imperial Irrigation District's interests when it comes to the Colorado River? And are there things that Metropolitan could do to shore up those supplies? What about local supplies? Well, that's another interesting question, because there has been a lot of development of local supplies in Southern California. And there are more on tap, including Regional Recycled Water Project. All of those investments, of course, have an impact on rates. And that means that when you look at the cumulative impact, if all of those local supplies projects get built and all of this state infrastructure gets built, that really calls into question the ability of anyone to afford water into the future. And I'm going to come back to that too. Well, again, what is the status of local storage? It's a lot better than it was 20, 30 years ago. And it raises the question of, well, if it's in good shape now, why is it that then when there's a need to conserve, agencies don't want to do it? Another question to look at is, why do we have salinity problems in the Delta currently? Well, again, we know the answer to that one. It's not just sea level rise. The answer is there's too much water being taken out of the Delta. Too much water that isn't allowed to flow down the Sacramento River into the Delta in the first place. This is not a problem that falls squarely on the State Water Project, but the State Water Project is a contributor to the current issues. And these issues have significant consequences for Delta communities in terms of harmful algal blooms, the commercial fishing industry, for tribes, and for others who live in the area. I mentioned sea level rise. How much and how fast is an important issue to look at. But the level of risk is something that needs to be balanced against the types of investment and affordability impacts that those investments would have. So let me turn to cost. Let's talk about cost. We often hear that the State Water Project water is the least cost source of supply out there. Wade Crowfoot, who is the governor's secretary for natural resources, said it yesterday in a hearing. Is that true? Well, it's not that simple. If you count conservation as a source of supply, conservation is cheaper. And if you actually factor in externalities, that is environmental impacts of the State Water Project, the costs don't look as good. And what do I mean by that? Well, in addition to just the overall environmental degradation of the Delta and impacts to the ecosystem, including fish species, other externalities are things like the social damage caused. And the State Water Project contractors don't pay for that. They don't pay for bankruptcy and unemployment insurance for commercial fishing operators who've lost their livelihoods because the commercial fishing season has been shut down 2 years in a row, right? So there are a lot of externalized costs that are not being paid for in the State Water Project water. And if those internalized costs were included, it wouldn't look so good when you do cost comparisons relative to other sources. But okay, let's assume that the State Water Project deliveries to SoCal need to stay at their current levels. So how could we maintain them? Well, you generally hear two options. You heard one of them in Jennifer's presentation, which is, well, build a new conveyance system that isn't subject to as many restrictions on pumping as the current one. And the corollary to that, the second option is, well, just waive those pesky environmental regulations, and then you could get more water down here. That's the current preferred strategy by the illegitimate administration in Washington, D.C. Here's what you don't ever hear. Take it from agriculture. Let's review the State Water Project Table A allocations, which are the how much water is allowable for each contractor under the contracts they have with the state, those 29 different contractors that Jennifer mentioned. The largest allocation goes to the Metropolitan Water District. But the second largest allocation goes to the Kern County Water Agency. Most of that water goes towards agricultural production. The State Water Project deliveries, as you know, are highly variable depending on whether it's a wet year or a dry year. DWR's projection is that the long-term average has been about 60% of those Table A allocations, the maximums. So the State Water Project maximum is a little over 4.1 million acre feet. At the 60% level, it's around 2.7 million acre feet. Again, as a long-term average. So that means that Kern County gets approximately 600,000 acre feet. Ask yourself, is that necessary? Is that reasonable? Is it fair to Southern California ratepayers? But, you might say, what about water rights? What about contracts? What about the food supply? Now ask yourself, do water rights supersede societal needs? Do water rights supersede the state's duty to protect the public trust, to protect the environment? Do water rights supersede social good? Can contracts be amended for cause? Jennifer mentioned all the contractors re-up their contracts through 2085. Does that mean they couldn't be amended for any circumstance under any condition until 2085? Are contracts those contracts the most durable legal instruments that exist out there, given the rest of the state environmental laws, both in the state constitution and other laws that exist. And then ask yourself, which agricultural products use the most water? And hint, it's not fruits and vegetables. So let's return to the initial exercise and ask the question, how do you maintain affordability? If affordability is one of your goals, everyone likes to say that it's a goal. How do you maintain affordability if your plan is to build a $20+ billion tunnel and a $4+ billion reservoir? Who pays for that? How does that show up in rates? And who doesn't pay for that? Again, Kern County, almost 25% of the state water project. Ask yourself how much money they've put into this so far. And it's zero. Whose water needs are the most important? I want you to imagine a different future. In this future, Southern California has a sustainable and affordable water supply portfolio. In this future, the people and the animals that rely on healthy rivers are thriving. And in this future, the farmers continue to grow high quality fresh fruits and vegetables, some dairy, and some tree nuts. What would it take to get there? Well, one thing it would take is more federal investment. It's been 50 years since the last era of major federal funding, and the ability of the state and locals to pay for all the investments we need, regardless of which investments you think we need. Certainly, I don't think the Delta Conveyance Facility or Sites Reservoir are investments we need, but I think there are a lot of other investments that we do need in safe and clean drinking water, in environmental water needs, and other categories. Probably one thing that we agree on is we need more federal investment. Hard to see how we get that given the current administration, but I'm sure we can cover some of that in Q&A. Second thing it would take to get there is breaking the political stranglehold of big agriculture. Right now, nothing happens in California relating to water supply unless agriculture is not opposing it, or at least some agriculture. In fact, the only reason we got a groundwater law passed 11 years ago now, 100 years after the first surface water regulations were passed, was because some people in the agricultural community were being harmed by the overpumping of other people in the agricultural community. This stranglehold by agriculture, which uses 80% of developed water, over our politics is devastating to people and communities. It is foreclosing opportunities for Southern California to have a thriving economy because of the way that the water's who controls the water. Now, I'm hopeful that the next governor who will be elected after November of next year may be willing to take a different approach. But one thing to keep in mind is that if Metropolitan and other large urban suppliers stop aligning with Big Ag on water policy, things could change. We don't need a new conveyance system. We have a conveyance system. We have 2 conveyance systems for Southern California. And the water is there. It's just that agriculture is hogging it. So ask yourself if you think this future is possible. For my part, I do. Because I believe that an informed electorate and ethical leaders can make positive and equitable change. And I look forward to the Q&A. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Max, and thank you, Jennifer. If you could go ahead and put your camera on. And Stephanie, if you could show the slides with the directions for how we move forward with our Q&A, just as a reminder. For those of you who don't know me, I am Dee Zink. I'm co-chair with Connor of the Dialogue, and I'll be handling our Q&A today. So again, go to the next slide. We're asking you to use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, not the chat. We don't check the chat for questions. Go ahead, the next slides. And again, once you type your question in, or if somebody else types the question that you want to hear answered, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. That will pop it up to the top of the screen for me so that I can see those questions that are the highest priority, and we'll get going on them. So Stephanie, I think we're done with these slides and we can go back to our panelists. And thank you for running the presentation. All right, very good. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to start with a question from John Shelton. And I apologize to anybody if I butcher your name. I try to do. And I also want to say I see a lot of old friends on our list of attendees today. So welcome back to the dialogue. It's good to see you all. John Shelton is asking Jennifer, with the continued use of the political processes to avoid historical agreements for regulations that were designed to protect the environment, how can the state water contractors build confidence with the voters and taxpayers and ratepayers that you will do what you are saying in the proposed operation criteria for new facilities? How can they trust the operations that you talk about? That was my ad lib at the end, sorry.
Thanks for the question. I don't agree that we've had political processes that have, avoided environmental regulation. There have certainly been instances where there's been emergencies declared by the governor over the years, and within the water rights permit, there's opportunities for the State Water Board to take a look at that. The State Water Project is a junior water right holder. We're pretty much junior to everybody in the system. So usually by the time those adjustments are being made by the State Water Board related to water rights, the State Water Project's already cut to health and safety. So oftentimes the conflict is between, for example, two species, one that may need cold water, one that may need delta outflow, or it's with senior water rights holders or others that are more senior within the system. So, I don't believe that there are instances where the State Water Project has been operated inconsistent with the law. I think that's really important to us. And as I mentioned during my presentation, we really are dedicated, and we have not only, been spending dollars through Department of Water Resources, but our organization, including Metropolitan, make significant investments in additional science to really better understand how to operate the system so that we can protect species at the same time that we can move some water. Dee, if it's okay if I share my screen, I think I just pulled up yesterday's operations and I thought it was pretty informative to the conversation and maybe even to answer this.
Go ahead.
Great. So this is, can you see that?
Now we can.
Great. This is February 18th operations. So yesterday's operations. Clifton Court inflow is where the state project diverts, and Jones is where the Central Valley diverts. You can see the total diversion rate yesterday was 6,700 CFS. The total delta inflow was nearly 160,000 CFS. So this is when we have opportunities to actually divert more water. There is not a single water quality issue. There is not a single species issue related to this sort of water that's flowing through our system right now, but we are restricted in the South Delta. So this isn't about big ag or about, modifying rules. This is about when there's excess flow in the system. And we see this in wet years, dry years, all sorts of years, because there's always storms. How do we better take advantage of that so that we can take pressure off the Delta in drier conditions? That's the part we are trying to solve for, is being able to take advantage of this amount of water. And even if both the Central Valley Project and the State Water Project were at their full pumping capacity, that's about 15,000 CFS. Again, 10% or less of what's flowing through the Delta. And we've been several days now without a storm. So this was much higher last week. We were at much lower pumping even. I think it's reasonable to think about how we take advantage of these high flow conditions. And that will require both climate responsive operations as well as new infrastructure. My objective is in the future, we're able to make these sorts of adjustments in our operations so that when there's drier conditions and there is an emergency around drought, which there will inevitably be, there is less pressure on the Delta system coming from the state water contract projects. Thank you.
Thanks, Jennifer. Max, did you want to say anything about trust and operations or anything before I go to the next question?
Well, I'll just say, right, no one trusts that operations will be as promised. In fact, the one of the ongoing disputes has always been, because Delta Conveyance has been proposed for decades now, that, well, if it ever gets built, the pressure to utilize it at full capacity will be overwhelming because of the amount of money was sunk into building it. So and unfortunately, the proponents of Delta Conveyance and the Department of Water Resources is the chief proponent, likes to piecemeal. It always likes to say, well, we're going to do an environmental review on constructing the thing, and we're going to do operations separately. And it just doesn't engender any trust that any conveyance system would be operated with a eye towards fulfilling the law of co-equal goals or actual environmental restoration. So I'll just add that.
Okay,
If
thank
I
you.
may, I want to clarify, the proposal is that we would continue to rely primarily on the existing facilities. So that would be kind of the primary thing. So the Delta conveyance facility is really meant to be used under the excess conditions like I was demonstrating was occurring yesterday and probably for the next several days. So the idea is to, really utilize it then. And that's the basis on which each of the participating project agencies would be determining whether or not to participate in the project.
I think the broadly speaking, the environmental and Delta communities would feel a lot more secure if there were strong regulations from the State Water Board that specify exactly how much water has to be left in the rivers and when.
Max, I think that's a reference to the water quality control plan under review right now. Let me move on to the next question. This is from Diane Wallace. She's saying, if it's not mentioned during presentations, could you please provide an update on the project to install solar panels over the canals? Jennifer, this is going to be a question to you, and I don't know that we anticipated it over the state water project, but there are other projects around the state. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. There is not a proposal for that to be on the state project, but I'm familiar with the Turlock Irrigation District, who received some grant funding from the state of California a few years ago to look at this issue, and they have installed some, what I understand to be kind of overhanging solar panels, and they've looked at different engineering techniques for different widths of canals. And I think they're finding that, there's only so much width that can actually kind of be sustained along these canals, and that certainly would preclude state water project. As it relates to state water project, most of our canals run through the San Joaquin Valley, where I think it was mentioned, we do have Sigma, there is land that is going to be fallowed. We expect a lot of land to come out of production. So there really isn't a land limitation. So it doesn't make sense for the department to try to either catapult or place solar panels over the canal. There's concern about maintenance. There's concern about metal leaching. There's concern about the subsided nature of the facilities and adding additional structure onto that. So I don't think we're going to see that on the state project, but I think that Turlock is definitely doing work to help inform where that might make sense on smaller systems, more closed systems, especially in ag districts. So I think more to come on that.
Jennifer, do you want to talk a little bit about renewable energy as it relates to the project, though?
Sure. We produce a lot of energy at Oroville through hydroelectric facilities, and then also use a lot of energy. In fact, the State Water Project's the single largest user of energy in the state at about 3%. However, we're also about 50 to 70% renewable already, making us one of the most green utilities in the state. We are obligated to get to 100% renewable 10 years sooner than everybody else in the state. So our target is 2035. We're working closely with the Department of Water Resources to map that out in an affordable way. We're also working with the California Independent Systems Operator to better understand how the State Water Project is used on the system. I mentioned our ability to help the grid. And as an example, on the day that we all received that Amber Alert on, I think it was September 6, 2022, to turn off your AC and turn off your lights, the State Water Project stopped pumping water to Southern California, and we actually addressed 20% of the deficit in that moment. And each year since, the State Water Project has continued to be called on to address that. So we're pretty agnostic in terms of the types of renewable energy. We just need to meet that renewable goal. I expect that we'll be looking at additional solar projects. I think there's some hydrogen on the table. We're very proud of our member agencies who within their service areas are also doing a huge amount of work to make sure that their water distribution systems are getting cleaner and cleaner to meet their goals as well. I just heard yesterday that Palmdale is a major proponent and investor in hydrogen in their area that's going to help them deliver water cleanly within the Palmdale region. So a lot is happening in this space. It's moving quickly, but State Water Project certainly leading the way with our 2035 goal.
Thank you, Jennifer. Max, I'm going to direct this next question to you, but Jennifer, since it's about something you said, you may want to also comment. It's from Katie Wagner, and she's asking, Max, that Jennifer said that we see the wet season maybe not drying up, but shifting to later in the year. If that's the case, how will that impact spawning and other wildlife reproductive cycles? Is research being done on this topic?
It's a
I'm
really
not.
Go ahead, Mark. Sorry. Go ahead.
I'm not the expert on this. My understanding is there is some research being done on this topic. But the key finding from the State Water Board's own report, the so-called scientific basis report, which is underlying the Bay Delta water quality flows proceeding, is that a major factor in the decline of the ecosystem has been the lack of freshwater flows and the lack of cold water flows. When you think about a evolving scenario with warmer and later storms, it basically means that in order to maintain fish populations, we're going to need to release more water out of our cold water storage to maintain those populations if they need a certain temperature and a certain amount of flow. So that's I think sort of high level what's needed, and then of course that raises the question of, well, that water would otherwise have gone to certain contractors of both the state and the federal systems. So how are we designing the rules to make sure that they're not taking it and it's going into the ecosystem?
Thank you, Max. Jennifer?
Yeah, I would just add, I mean, I think cold water is probably, as it relates to ecosystem management, is going to be the biggest challenge under climate change. It is true that we have to use the water stored in dams to try to maintain cold water, but it's also true that not all the water behind dams can be kept cold. And it's also true that that in the face of climate change, some spaces are better off with a dam because the dam is able to collect that water that otherwise wouldn't be available in the summer, for example, for fish. I think what we're trying to understand right now is what areas in the state can actually support the cold water needs of the species, because some are just not going to be able to under the climate scenarios. And how do we focus on that? And I think specifically to Katie's question, I think one of the things that fish agencies and fish biologists are looking at is life history diversity, and how do you not create kind of this very narrow survivability within a species. And I think the changing climate is definitely putting pressure on that. So we can look at things like, changes in our flow patterns, changes in amounts of flow, hatchery management, refuge habitat. So it is true that the state board's scientific basis report was very flow focused, but it's also true that there is a significant body of evidence, especially for salmon, which are our cold water dependent species, that having access to floodplains, for example, helps them to be more resilient across a whole host of environmental stressors. So I think that there's a lot of shifting of focus from our kind of historic scientific endeavors into being more climate focused. And that particular question you're asking is being addressed through that climate lens. But it's a really challenging one. And I think, unfortunately, we're going to have to figure out how do we address the necessary trade-offs, not between people and farms and fish, but really between just that are going to occur because there just isn't going to be cold water. Most water that's cold is coming from snowpack. If we're losing that snowpack, it makes it very challenging to manage for. And so how do you create a system that can be resilient to that? And I think that's a very newer question that is just beginning to be explored.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Let me just add on briefly. The state's largest reservoir, which also has its largest cold water pool, is Lake Shasta. Now, that's not run by the State Water Project. That's run by the federal government, the Bureau of Reclamation, for the Central Valley Project. But it links to what I was saying in my remarks, right? That water is critical for freshwater flows down the Sacramento River into and through the Delta, and for the survival of fish species at temperature. The largest single group of contractors in the state are the Sacramento River settlement contractors. They get over 2 million acre feet of water every year from the federal project, and they are so-called senior water rights holders, which means that they get cut last, regardless of what the conditions are. That is the type of thing that I think needs to change. We need to do away with the senior water rights priority. We need to cut the allocation. Most of that water is being used to grow rice. A lot of that rice is exported. That is not a social priority, an environmental priority for the state.
I'm going to move on to the next question. Thank you, Max. We have a question. Actually, this is directed to you, Max, but I think Jennifer may be the one that's going to answer it. It's asking you, Max, how is it that Kern County and the Resnicks haven't put any money into the state water project? So Kern, in fact, is a part of the state water project. So go ahead, Max, if you have something you want to say first, but I think Jennifer may want to jump in here.
Yeah, and I think what may be being conflated here is the state water project and the Delta conveyance project that's proposed. Right. So far, Kern hasn't contributed proportionate to the amount of water it takes from the state water project into any of the planning studies and the environmental review for the Delta conveyance project. And lest you think this is a small amount of money, it's not. This is hundreds of millions of dollars. In fact, Metropolitan just a few months ago approved another, I think it was $141 million for additional planning and environmental review for the Delta conveyance project. So Kern is absolutely skirting its share, and Metropolitan and its ratepayers broadly, right? It's a wholesaler, but the costs eventually get passed down to the retail agencies, is picking up the tab. Now, Metropolitan's tried to squeeze some of that money out of the state. There was some deal making there. That's more detail than we need to go into on this call. But the bottom line is that Kern County, which again is the second largest contractor of the 29 state water project contractors, has not committed to paying its share for the Delta Tunnel project. And if the Delta Tunnel project goes forward and the state issues bonds to pay for it, there's a real question of, well, who's going to cover that cost for almost a quarter of the water?
So that's not true. Since 2005, when the Bay Delta Conservation Plan planning began, the Kern County Water Agency has been contributing planning dollars. In the beginning phases of the planning, it was kind of a pass the hat type approach, but in the last several funding rounds, including those that Metropolitan has participated in, the Kern County Water Agency has also paid its proportionate share of the planning dollars. It has not yet taken its most recent vote. Metropolitan just took its vote in December. A few other agencies took their votes in January and just earlier this month. But that is untrue that Kern has not paid for its share of the planning dollars. It has been paying since the beginning of the most recent iteration in 2005 and 6.
I
just
think
wanna say,
the critical thing
Metropolitan-
here is how is its share being defined? Its share is not defined as a proportionate to its total percent of the table A allocation.
And Max, I just want to say that Metropolitan's vote was predicated on only paying our proportionate share. So that decision that by the Met board last month, that was an important aspect for our board. So I do want to make sure that that's clear on this last vote. And I'm sorry if I interjected there, but I want to make sure that that's clear. No more for anybody. Okay, all right, I'm going to move on to the next question then. This one's from Charming Evelyn. And Charming is asking a question for you, Jennifer. And the question is that she just toured the State Water Project, and there was a lot of discussion centering around restoring salmon to the Delta. Very little said about smelt and the connection to flows. How does DWR square using more flows when the Delta smelt are on the endangered species list and require sandy habitat to thrive?
Thank you for the question. Delta smelt is a very challenging species. There are probably very few left in the wild, and the most recent conservation strategy has been to create conservation hatcheries in the Delta that are being used to supplement the population as well as better understand that fish. In terms of their relationship to flow, they are not one of the 4 species that have been identified as having an abundance flow relationship, although that has been hypothesized as long ago as the 2008 biological opinion related to FOLX2, which was a very controversial measure that you've probably heard of. I think there's a lot to learn about this species. I firmly believe in protections under Endangered Species Act. A lot of our entrainment restriction in the South Delta is because of a need to eliminate or significantly minimize entrainment of Delta smelt. It's interesting that you brought up sandy habitat. I think that has also been a hypothesis. This is a mystery fish. We're trying to figure out, what are the habitat conditions that they need? Obviously, fish need flow. I think that's not a serious conversation to come in and say flow is not part of their habitat. Flow, air is our habitat, water is fish, but understanding, what is actually needed to manage them is something that has been really challenging, in part because I think we have been so focused on certain flow provisions and haven't spent enough time really figuring out where these fish are, what they're responding to. They have temperature tolerances as well. We've seen very strong populations in the spring, followed by very hot summers. We can't control water temperature in the Delta. It's all controlled by the atmospheric temperature. So when we have significantly hot summers here in the valley, we lose a lot of smelt. I do think that setting aside any water use for humans and farms, we are going to have an inherent conflict between the cold water that we need in reservoirs, as Max pointed out, for salmon, and that same exact set of molecules of water flowing through the system for things like water quality and for management of Delta flows. So we have to figure out how to balance those things. And I think it's a really challenging thing. We're seeing even the State Water Board's analysis around their unimpaired flow proposals. They cannot simultaneously meet the outflows that the board staff have proposed and the cold water goals that the board have proposed. So we have this conflict already, and we're going to have to figure it out. And I think with Delta smelt, we've basically completely reduced our entrainment since 2008. We've spent lots of money figuring that out. We still don't have a good sense of their habitat. We've been building habitat. We see them using it, but we're not seeing that population rebound. And the question in my mind is, are we able to manage this fish outside the risk of climate change? I don't know, because what we're observing is that they can't make it through hot summers. So big question mark for me too, for now.
Thank you, Jennifer. Max, this next question is for you. It's from Carolee Krieger, and it's asking about how is the State Water Project dealing with enforcing the public trust doctrine? The public trust doctrine has priority over water rights according to law. And actually, it's not specified for you. I think I was looking at the next one. So, but would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, the public trust doctrine is a really important legal doctrine, and it's called a doctrine because it is, I would say, partially enshrined in Constitution and statute, but it exists also independently. It's been around for centuries, and basically, the core to it is that the state, the government, has a duty to protect the public trust, which is broadly speaking, the environment, access to navigable waterways. Um, um, on behalf of the populace, on behalf of everyone, and that the government cannot give it away, cannot abdicate that responsibility. And the seminal cases on the public trust, both at the federal level and at the California Supreme Court, have basically affirmed that the state has an ongoing duty. The government, whether it's federal government or state government, has an ongoing duty to weigh and protect the public trust whenever possible, and always has to evaluate the public trust and its duty as a trustee when looking at any other type of project, and what impacts it would have. And that duty exists at all times. And so in the state context, the key case was the Mono Lake decision, which basically said, well, no, the city of Los Angeles can't pump Mono Lake dry because there is a public trust interest in protecting that lake. And it is the state's responsibility to uphold it. At the federal level, and this dates, back over a century now, the key case was basically one where the state of Illinois was giving away access to its waterfront to private parties. And the Supreme Court said, you can't do that. That's a public trust resource that belongs to the people via the government. So this notion, this sort of legal bedrock principle, is critical to California water, because water and the environment it sustains is a public trust resource. And so I think there's a sort of eventually going to be a major legal battle that pits the public trust against the water rights system. And my money's on the public trust. But the water rights system, in addition to being racist and inequitable and not good for managing in a climate change 21st century society, does not exist above and separate from the public trust. It is subservient to the public trust, and I think we're seeing that really play out now in we've referenced this a couple times now in the water quality control plan for the Bay Delta, because the state's public trust responsibility is to ensure that the water quality and the flows protects the public trust. You can't do that if you're giving it away via voluntary agreements or via rules that are insufficiently protective. So I see this as a sort of major set of legal battles that are upcoming.
Thank you, Max. Jennifer, did you want to comment? And I'm just going to note the time. We have less than 15 minutes left in our meeting, and we've got 6 more questions. So, but go ahead if you
All
want
I'll
to
say
say.
is, I think Max is right. There's probably going to be some legal activity. I think there's obviously a debate on what's sufficient for protection of those public trust resources. And I think we have a difference of opinion on what that looks like.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. This next one I have not read in advance, so I'm going to just admit right now, this may be a statement and not a question, but I'm going to go ahead and give it to the anonymous attendee that Max is right on the money when he speaks about power, money, and politics of California water. With Trump's desire to turn on the faucet and Newsom's complicity in this demand, it's likely CVP allocations will increase. There's a question. How will that impact the state water project allocations and CVP regulations? If the Central Valley project takes more water out of the Delta, the burden to meet water quality standards will fall on the state water project, which would likely lead to less water available for Southern California, not more. So that's sort of a question and an answer. But do you guys agree with the answer, disagree? Who wants to go first?
I can go briefly on this, because we were just speaking about, the differences of opinion on legal, legal interpretation. I foresee, and this one might be where we have more similar views. I foresee a lot of pushback from the state, pending what the federal agencies do in response to the Trump executive orders. And what powers they claim they have over the Central Valley Project to, ignore state rules and laws. And I foresee some legal action there as well, because the commenter is right that if the Central Valley Project gets away with not contributing to the water quality standards, then that burden will fall to the State Water Project. And that opens up a whole mess of operational and other dynamics.
Jennifer?
There's a wide open potential future, and I don't know that any of us can anticipate it. I think that, we are committed to science-based operations. That's where the State Water Project is going to be. We want to make sure that we're justifying all of the different things that we're doing. We do need to have affordable water and reliable water, but we are a different system. And, I don't know where the Central Valley Project is going to go. I have talked to many of my colleagues in the Central Valley Project, and I think everybody is very focused on having stability in our water system. I think whether you're an ag user, an urban user, having that stability is very important for planning and investment purposes. And hopefully we're able to move past this moment in a way that continues to have the projects cooperating. And until we're not, I don't really want to speculate on all the different iterations of what that future looks like.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. I'm going to ask you both if you would. This has been really great. I love all the answers. It's been very detailed. Let's try to see if we can do like 30-second answers to get through the last of these questions. Okay. This next one's from Charming Evelyn. She's asking about excess flows, that they're needed for many different reasons. Cold flows for juvenile salmon, silt for habitat and beach erosion, lessening the salinity of the delta. These are never spoken of. How can you restore habitat without more than adequate flows to restore our fisheries, which have lost about she's $500,000, but I don't think it's dollars. I think, Charming, maybe you meant the water quantity, but in any case, over the last 2 years.
Well, I'll just answer that I'm a person that does believe that there is some amount of flow that's necessary to support ecosystem functions in the Delta. I would never argue that, but I think we have not spent hardly any money trying to understand that. So where that threshold is to support the various functions that are described in this question is an unknown factor. And one of the reasons why under the voluntary agreements and Healthy Rivers and Landscapes, we're trying to dedicate a block of water to better understand that question. If we can figure out where that line is, then we know what's safe to move and what's not. But there's nobody or any published data that would suggest right now that 160,000 CFS is that line. So we should have been pumping more in the last several weeks.
Okay, I'm gonna, unless you really want to say something, Max, I'm gonna go to the next question.
No, go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
All right. So I'm also, this is from Charming, so maybe it's just an add-on. Can you address the hatchery trying to get salmon to swim in a different direction to what they're hardwired to do?
Briefly, fish have olfactories, which is kind of like a smelling, and they try to find their home, their natal stream. And I think hatcheries have completely messed that up. They are an important factor in maintaining our commercial fishery. Most commercial fishing is from hatchery fish, but it is impacting our natural fish. So I do think that we need to be honing in more on how we manage hatcheries in the state so that we can both support a commercial fishery and also help to restore natural fish. There is a lot of thought going into this now. Not just with the State Water Project, but I think in collaborative groups that we're involved in and just throughout the state, really revisiting hatchery management, because you are right, it's an issue.
Max, jump in if you want to. I'm just going to
No,
keep going.
I know they're outstanding ones, so I'm gonna
Okay, okay.
help us move
The
along.
next one is specific to Jennifer, though. You're being asked to define excess conditions. And would we really pay $20 billion only to use on excess? What would that water cost if the DCP wasn't used every year, but only on excess? The CBA doesn't specify.
So,
And can you
did,
define CBA for people?
oh yeah, I don't know what that is.
Cost benefit
Cost benefit
analysis.
analysis. Okay, we call it the BCA. Okay, so just backing up the last few years, in 2022, critically dry year, the project would have been able to move 236,000 acre feet of water. This was because we did have storms and there was instances of excess. So that was water that would have been very helpful to Southern California in either avoiding or significantly reducing the restrictions on water that were placed in LA that year. In 2023 was a wet year. Following that dry year, another 228,000 acre feet could have been moved. In 2024, last year, we had an above normal year, and there was nearly 1 million acre feet of water that we would have been able to move through the tunnel, again, in excess of meeting fish requirements, water quality requirements, all the senior water rights holders. And the reason was because there was a bunch of steelhead for the first time ever parked in front of the pumps for like 3 months straight. And we still don't know why, and we're going to do some research on that. And so far in 2025, also so far an above normal year, we would have been able to move 656,000 acre feet. So we're not really seeing on the record that there's a dry year, wet year, and you're going to have the tunnel offline. We're seeing that there are instances where the restrictions in the South Delta are not applicable to a separate point of diversion, and we are able to utilize the tunnel for that. And it's incredibly meaningful in each year that it gets used.
Jennifer, can I just ask that you clarify because I'm not sure it's clear to people. You said there was a bunch of salmon parked in front of the pumps. And so what you're saying is that we weren't pumping them, the state project wasn't pumping them because they were there. That's
We
what
were pumping at a minimal amount that was on the minimal range of our permits because we were entraining a lot of fish. And even when we turned the pumps almost all the way down, the fish were still coming. And it's a species that's typically migrating through the Delta, but for some reason it wanted to sit right there. So, and there were a lot of them. So we're pretty much out of commission for almost all of the season last year.
Thank you. Max, did you?
I'll just note that the actual environmental documents, both the state environmental document as well as the federal document, because the federal government did its own environmental review for the tunnel, are both very clear that one of the goals is to pump more water. In really in all water year types, but in particular in dry and critically dry water years, when that water is most desperately needed by the ecosystem.
Thank you, Max. Okay, one last question, I think, because the last one I see is not a question, but let's keep on moving. This is from Charming Evelyn. She's asking if you can address adding in the tunnel, but still leaving the Tracy pump in operation that entrains fish. How does that square? How's that going to work?
Well, it's just like if you took today, we are at relatively low pumping compared to our capacity. And we are minimizing entrainment of fish by doing that. And so that is important for our environmental protection, but under certain conditions, it's also very important because it moves fresh water through the Delta. So when this kind of situation is happening, which is when we're anticipating the best benefit of the tunnel, is that we're able to continue to maintain those environmental protections in the South Delta, while also moving a portion of our water supply from the North Delta into the Delta Conveyance Project without significant reductions in the total flow in the Delta. So they work hand in hand, and it's been important to the Delta communities to continue to use the South Delta facilities so that we are creating that kind of freshwater flow through the Delta that creates water quality improvements for many of the Delta channels.
I think that's our last question. I'm going to turn the program back over to Connor to close us out for the day. Just thank you very much, both of our speakers today. And as you saw from Diane Wallace's comment, she thought it was very informative as well.
Thank you, Dee. I want to thank both our speakers. I want to thank everybody who was on and stayed on for a very interesting counterpoint. My mentors, Dorothy Green and Carla Bard, who was then head of the State Water Resource Control Board, went way back on this issue, and I imagine there will be people still working on this issue long after some of us are gone. So this is an ongoing dialogue. There's still lots of challenges and unanswered questions, but I want to thank you all and look forward to us moving forward. Our next meeting is March 26th. And again, let us know if you have other ideas, but I think this was an excellent opportunity. Thank you all. Bye. Good night and good luck.
Connor, I don't think we've met, but nice to meet you.